Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. I'm Nick, and this is Super Simple Security Principles, where we talk about digital security principles that are easy to understand no matter your skill level. We are part of the I Hate Passwords Digital Self Defense Academy, or IHP Academy for short.
So, welcome in today's episode 25. We're going to be talking about the massive, what I call, meltdown of CrowdStrike. What happened? That's what I want to know, and that's what we're going to talk about today on our episode. Today, joining me, as always, we've got our Master Guardian. Woo!
Nick,
How are we doing today, Makati?
awesome. Very, very happy and excited today. This will be a fun one to talk about.
This is going to be a super fun one because guess what? We brought in backup. We brought in backup today.
We got the big gun.
We needed, yeah, buddy. We brought in Kim. Kim, welcome to our show. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure. You might not be able to tell, but a lot of people think I sound the same as Makani, so hopefully you can distinguish our voices well enough to actually recognize when it's me speaking and when it's Makani, but if not, whatever. We're brothers. Been programming for forever. Been interested in security for forever. Considered becoming a hacker myself at one point just for fun to see what I could do. Not maliciously, but just I decided not to because I figured I might get in trouble with the law even if I didn't do anything malicious. So that's particularly relevant background today, I think.
Absolutely.
Which is why I'm coming on the show instead of just watching from the sidelines as I usually do.
We appreciate you coming on the show, and there's some cool background for you. Could have been a hacker, but decided to stay a little bit honest. I love it. Yes.
Well, I would have been a white hat. A good hacker, the good kind.
Yes. Worked for a company to figure out what flaws they had in their system, right?
Right.
I love it. I love it. Fantastic. So how did we get here today? Like there's a little piece of me that really wants to know. We've heard this news that people
what have you
can't
heard?
travel. I've heard people can't travel. Is this true?
I know you had a story you were going to share about your daughters.
I do, yeah. In fact, they were on their way to Georgia, right? They were going to go see their grandmother in Georgia. Got a plane ticket. They'd had it scheduled long in advance. They made it as far as Denver, Colorado, and then got stuck in Denver, Colorado for the duration of their trip. Ended up renting a car. It was easier to go rent a car and drive home because they could not get a flight. So what I've heard is that there was a meltdown in some sort of system, airline system, that caused everything to crash. How accurate is that? How far off the truth?
Yeah, they're reasonably lucky that they were able to get a car. Frankly, there were a lot of auto rental agencies that were affected as well, but not as
Really?
many as there were airlines, and banks, and like 25 to 50%, depending on who you believe, of Fortune 500 companies were affected by CrowdStrike. They're big. They're everywhere.
Wait, what? Did I hear you correctly? 25
Yeah.
to potentially 50%?
There were 8.5 million computers that were brought to their knees. 8.5 million.
And these weren't,
yeah.
and these
all
weren't
at
home
once.
computers.
Boom.
These weren't home computers, individuals that, just impact that single person or their family, right? These were all business computers.
Yes.
So we've got 8.5.
By and large, they're right. These were enterprise computers, yeah. So they were, I guess,
right. They're
probably
not have
all business. In theory, a home person could have subscribed to the service.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah.
Oh my goodness! What went wrong with these computers? Like, how does 8.5 million computers just die, go to its knees? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So basically, CrowdStrike is they're a kind of a high-end antivirus company. Uh,
okay,
like AVG or Norton or whatever. They're just a little bit. Uh, they're more geared towards the enterprise, and they're better than a lot of those other companies as well. They've prevented a lot of problems over the years as well before this happened. But basically, what it boils down to in a nutshell is that um, they sent an update out to these 8.5 million computers that had a bug in it that caused it to crash when it was loading, and Windows, Microsoft, um, trusts them really implicitly, and so it loads, and it's required to load in order for Windows to work. So basically,
okay.
Windows saw that it wasn't working and said, I can't start without you, so I'm not starting because it's not safe. Because it's
Oh,
because it's a it's a bank. Their antivirus software doesn't start up. They don't necessarily want their computers running without their antivirus,
absolutely. Yeah, I
right?
agree
So
with
that's
that.
sort of
Yeah.
um, a tough
Catch
spot.
22.
But unfortunately, they weren't able to restart at all, and weren't able to redeploy because they weren't able to come back online to get the fix. CrowdStrike actually had a fix within an hour, but the
Okay.
fix was unable to be deployed to almost all computers. There were a few that got lucky because they were maybe booting slow enough that part of them was able to go out and fetch that update and get the fix, but not very many of them were able to do that. The vast majority just basically stayed down and required a person to actually go physically to every one of those 8.5 million computers. And a
No.
lot of these are in data centers, potentially hours away
Right.
from wherever the
Right.
employees are and stuff. Had to go physically to every single computer and reboot it into what's called a safe mode, to fix them. The fix was really easy, but had to actually boot up every computer manually, all 8.5 million of them. I feel for the IT workers who were responsible
Oh my
for fixing
gosh.
CrowdStrike's bug, because they're not at fault at all, and some of them got fired because their companies thought it was their fault because their
Really?
computers were
Like,
all down, and their job is to make sure they stay up.
and people lost their jobs over a
Yeah, I
bug that
mean,
wasn't theirs.
hopefully they get hired back when their bosses realize it wasn't their fault, but they might not want to go back at that point.
Right? I don't know if I
Yeah,
would.
or might be looking for a new job anyway.
Right. Oh
One
my
I want to throw in here too about CrowdStrike because this all sounds pretty bad, right? And Ken mentioned this earlier, but if we were going to be recommending them, and obviously this wouldn't be for our listeners, our users, right? This is for businesses, big businesses especially. But from everything that I know of them, they are one that we would recommend. We would highly endorse. They've been trusted by people I trust for many years, and they've done a good job. And even with this misstep, I would my stance doesn't change, especially based on how they've responded to it. I'm not looking to blame CrowdStrike or say that, I mean, obviously they admit they were wrong and made a mistake, right? But
right.
it didn't lose my trust, or in general, as far as I can tell. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people who decide that they're to blame and don't trust them anymore just because they want a scapegoat. But people who understand, security experts, from what I've seen, still trust them. They just acknowledge this was a mistake and they need to improve, but mistakes happen.
Yeah, they actually have they have a lot of stuff in place, their process, which they've detailed for people because of this, um,
Yeah.
to prevent this sort of thing from happening. It's just that there was one little piece of the process that failed, basically, and that's a learning process that happens all the time. I mean, antivirus software that home users use regularly causes problems for the home users' systems. It's just not the
Okay.
same level of scale of impact
Gotcha.
because they're updating at different times and it crashes for a few people. It's annoying for those people, but they're not going to get any press.
Right?
It was
Right.
reported a lot early on when antivirus first started having problems, but I mean, if you run an antivirus yourself, it's annoyed you, guaranteed, one time or another over the years. I mean, it's a lot better now than it has been, but yeah, I certainly had lots of problems early on when I was using some antivirus.
Yep.
Okay, so there is a little bit of trade-off.
Yeah,
There are going to be some buggy things with.
yeah. The fact that it's
Yeah.
only happened once in all the time that they've been in business, that there's only been one significant kind of issue, is a testament, really, to how well they've been doing in their testing and their deployment, really.
Yeah. So, Nick, I know you've been talking to some friends and family about this, and I have a couple questions that I want to bring up and answer. But first, I want to make sure that we get your questions answered specifically, and any questions that you feel like need to be brought from any of our listeners that you've received.
Right.
Well, knowing that it was a bug, my next question is how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Because for me, like if it was that easy for one little bug to bring eight, what was it, 8.5 million? Is that
Yeah.
correct? Computers to their knees? Like 25 to 50% of these really good companies could have been affected. Like, this is huge. Like, how do we ensure this doesn't happen again? Like, are they on it, or do we just trust them, or have they
Right.
figured a
So
system out?
both CrowdStrike and Microsoft, like Microsoft could in theory have prevented this from happening um, by building in some procedures that would allow their system to boot and ignore bad stuff in the way, but they're not really at fault. But I bet they're going to implement some stuff to prevent it from happening again also. But CrowdStrike is taking steps to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Now, there aren't a lot of companies that are given the level of trust that CrowdStrike is by Microsoft. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know it's very small. So there aren't a lot of, like, AVG couldn't do this to every user's
Okay.
computer, right? Like, they can cause problems and they can cause a crash or whatever, but it's not going to kill the computer and prevent it from booting. Um, so, the CrowdStrike is doing what they need to. You got millions of computers running the same software. In theory, a hacker hacks Microsoft and is able to take over their system updates. That Patch Tuesday happens every once a month on Tuesdays. They send out patches. In
Okay.
theory, if a hacker got good enough access and could send out whatever they wanted there, they could bring down a lot of people. Microsoft has a lot of stuff in place to try and make sure that that doesn't happen. And so does CrowdStrike. Like, they're going to become juicy targets after this. Like, it's going to raise their awareness of a lot of hackers anyway. Just make them think
Okay.
about it a little bit more probably than they might have otherwise. Um, but yeah, the big hackers are already trying to get into Microsoft and CrowdStrike, so I don't think it really increases our risks significantly.
What do you got for us,
Well,
Makani?
yeah, well, I just want to, I mean, hopefully it's clear at this point, but I just want to state it very clearly that it was not only just a bug, but it wasn't a hack. It wasn't an attack of any sort,
It
Yeah,
even
was a
though it was
fluke thing.
security. It was it's security software, right? Which is why we're talking about it mostly because it's related to security, but it
Right.
wasn't a hack. So, and then I want to talk a little bit about preventing it happen in the future. And kind of Kem talked about kind of the technical or the specific instant things, but I want to talk about it kind of from a bigger picture perspective.
yeah. Okay. There's one
Um,
thing I want to just pop in real quick. Um,
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, that you reminded me of talking about our listeners and the relevance to them in terms of, like, why is this even a podcast for us? There's, I mean, it's interesting, but it's not necessarily helpful to the security of our users, which is our primary sort of focus. Except that there are going to be uh, a lot of like there are tons of CrowdStrike misspellings registered in DNS. So if you're going to look for news about this, make sure you type in the URL correctly, because otherwise you might end up going onto a malicious site on accident if you mistype crowdstrike.com. Crowdstrike.com is spelled just the way that it sounds, CrowdStrike.com. But yeah, that's something that is likely to catch a few people, probably not a ton because it's mostly going to be enterprise targeted. But anyway, that's all.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent.
That's a good reminder. I love it. They always got to take advantage of any opportunity to cook up a new phishing scheme. And that's as far as benefit to our listeners and what they can do and be protected. That's part of why I'm thinking about the bigger picture, is because even though this isn't so much about security protection, it is about our dependence on technology, right? And the impact that it has on that, and and the connection between security software and technology in general.
Yeah.
Because from a technical perspective, there are lots of people who knew how to prevent this before it happened. They know now,
Okay.
they knew before, but I want to look at some non-technical answers, because even though we had those answers, we didn't apply them. And in this particular case, it was CrowdStrike and Microsoft. But for example, in June, it was a ransomware attack against CDK and car dealerships.
Yeah.
It's not just a one-time problem, and nobody's going to question, but this is not going to be the last time. And that's why I think the bigger picture is interesting, because and I don't have all the answers here, but I want to share my perspective on the problem. And one of the answers, I think, to the question of why this happened and how do we prevent it is this, because they're closely related, is the concentration of power that has happened in the world of technology. In my opinion, at least, Microsoft has too much power. So does Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. And this breeds a lot of problems. One of them, though, is less competition, innovation, less human intelligence that is manifested in the quality of technology that we have. Now,
Yeah.
how to solve that is a much bigger scope, and I don't have an answer to that. I just think it's something interesting to think about. And the second reason that I think a lot about is the mindset and the culture, the whole culture around security, but also stability. Technology has brought such speed, power, and convenience to us, and those aspects are so compelling that they tend to overshadow the more invisible aspects of technology, which is the security, and like in the case of CrowdStrike, just stability.
Yeah.
And in a way, that perspective, I'm not saying it's wrong, because even though it's hard for me to say that, because I care about security and stability so much, but here's the thing, the approach we have been taking technology has yielded some amazing results. And it would be easy to second guess everything we've done and what we've prioritized, but that's mostly wasted effort, I think. So the question I am more interested in is a more forward-looking one, which is how much effort are we going to put into preventing it from happening in the future, without getting into the specifics of different attacks, because, like we said, it's not just the one. But the cost of this breakdown was massive, bigger probably than anything we've previously experienced.
Yeah,
Which, right,
easily,
which
easily. The estimates I've seen are $4.5 billion or so.
yeah,
Oh,
Wouldn't surprise me
billions
if that was
already?
low. In
right.
fact, it'd surprise me if it wasn't.
I was gonna say this early to already be billions, though. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, well,
because I'm
I mean,
assuming some of the reporting hasn't even been done of what the losses were.
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Well, like I think in the United States, if I remember right, pretty much every airline but Southwest or something, if I remember right, was
That's
they
what
had
I've
all
heard, but
their
I haven't actually verified that either.
right. Okay, and neither have I had like all their flights canceled for that day or whatever. So anyway, massive, right?
Yeah,
And so it might be a time, assigned to us that it's time to start putting more effort into security and stability as
yeah,
that trade-off becomes more apparent, right? But there's always going to be a balance between how much effort we put into security and stability versus the effort we put into features. We can't just put it all into security and stability. And it's hard to know where to draw the line. Every organization, every leader, every individual is going to have to decide for themselves and weigh the value of where their efforts are best spent. And one of the reasons I love technology is because it's like building blocks and it's so easy to take the existing little pieces of technology, reuse them, combine them, tweak them to create new things, and especially to make things that are so powerful like this, a computer and this CrowdStrike software that protects us and nobody using those things has any idea how to build them or how they work or anything. And that's the power of technology, but it's also its biggest weakness, right? Because if you put on a piece of armor, you got to, I mean, you're going to know how to use it. You got to know something about it. It's clear what it does. But with technology, it's so easy to misuse and abuse and just accidentally break. And so to me, that's kind of the biggest lesson from this event is that technology is fragile.
Yeah, right. And there were some other small airlines that also were not affected, Alaskan, for instance, but all the major airlines in the USA were grounded for some period of time due to this.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thanks for clarifying that. So
that's
I'm ready
crazy.
for a call to action unless you guys have any other questions or points you want to bring up.
I have one question for you.
Yeah.
You talked about a few companies and how they've gotten too big. Is that, and I'm going to ask you to speculate. Now, I apologize. Asking you to speculate because we were told, Kim mentioned the fact that Microsoft had given access to CrowdStrike, that maybe not every single one of their programs or features, or what do we want to call systems, they might not give that to everybody, but they gave it to CrowdStrike, excuse me.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that part of the problem? Microsoft was getting too big and just too trusting, and they figured, hey, look, this company's great, so we're going to let them have access.
No, I don't think that was part of
Wasn't the
the issue.
case.
No.
Okay.
It's actually necessary in this case for CrowdStrike to have the level of access that they did in order to be able to secure things the way that they do. And it
Okay.
has stopped many, many problems that you just don't hear about because they weren't problems, so that's not news. Um, Stopped hacks of tons of banks and hospitals and everything else, right? So
So they
it was
do
not
need the access they
they do
have.
need
It's
the
not
access
like,
that they have, yeah,
okay.
and they're not going to lose that because of this, I'm sure. Um,
Yeah. I certainly hope not. I agree with everything Kim just said, and I
yeah,
think that uh, yeah, there's things that we could do to mitigate that trust, but no, I don't think it's a question of misplaced trust.
Okay.
right.
So of course
I,
this is kind of, yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
yeah, I
Sorry.
was just, it was a question I had. Just curious
Yeah,
if it
well,
was,
and like I touched on earlier, Microsoft is likely, they haven't announced this, but I would be surprised if they didn't, likely to put some stuff in place to make it so that even that level of access can't cause this problem again.
okay.
Basically, make it so that if they're loading CrowdStrike stuff and it causes the system to crash, that it will reboot automatically, not try to load it, and let them know so that they know that there's a problem that needs to be solved immediately. because they need CrowdStrike in there, but at least allow the system to come back up. Go into
Okay.
maybe a waiting state where they're waiting for a patch, a new one to try, or something like that. I'd be very surprised if they didn't implement something like that. You won't hear about it, but it'll happen.
Well, it makes me feel better because for
Yeah.
me, not understanding all the levels of tech and especially all the levels of security, right? Because I do know that CrowdStrike is part of the security that these people have, these big businesses have in place. So for me, knowing that everybody's taking it serious and that they're going to come out with patches and fixes and repairs so this doesn't happen again, or at least to this scale doesn't happen again, makes me
Yeah.
feel a little bit better about scaring the crap out of me.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm certainly hopeful of that as well. So, with our call to action, this is kind of a tricky one given the scope of the problem, but here's my thought about something useful to do. And first and most of all is just ponder on the fragility of technology and, specifically identify some area of technology fragility and something that maybe could be done about it to either reduce the dependence on that technology, make it less fragile, or be prepared when it does break down. Because this is a tricky problem and we need more people working on it from every angle. And this could be about this exact situation. I know you may not be an influencer, but I think it's worth thinking about anyway. Or something of much smaller scope at your work or in your family or just yourself. And if it's something within your area of influence, maybe even take that action that you identified. So think about technology and how fragile it is.
Cool. And
Look,
if you have any questions about CrowdStrike or other security questions and you want to learn more or ask us questions, go to our forum. It's forum.ihpacademy.com and it's free. And we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yep.
absolutely.
We'll have a link in the show notes too.
And for our call to action, looking at our technology and looking at how fragile it is, this is something we already do without realizing it, right? Like I back up my phone because I know that if something happens to my phone, I want everything that I've got on there. So I back it up. So our call to action is let's look into technology and find a way to create systems like that to where we're backing it up or creating an extra step, an extra layer of protection. We're layering up. There you go.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
Keller. Makani, anything else? That's a great call to action.
Nope. I'm good for today.
Cam, it
Thanks.
was wonderful having you on, man.
That was interesting.
Sure.
And fun.
All right, man. Well, there's our show.
All right.
Okay, that's our super simple show today. If you're not a member of the IHP Academy already, please come join us for free. Stop searching the whole internet for answers and never knowing who to trust. Ask us instead. We made it super simple to find us, and it only takes 2 minutes to sign up. Just visit helpmegetsafe.com. Enter your name and your email. You're in. You can also find the link in our show notes. Thank you for joining us and make it a great day. Bye-bye.